The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the Rivers family estate, but Natalie could find no warmth in its rays. She sat at the breakfast table, pushing scrambled eggs around her plate while her father paced the length of the dining room like a caged animal. Thomas Rivers had always been a man of confidence, his posture straight, his voice commanding. But today, his shoulders slumped forward, and his hands trembled as he gripped his coffee cup. "Natalie, sweetheart," he began, his voice cracking slightly. "I need to tell you something." At 24, Natalie had lived a relatively sheltered life. She worked part-time at an art gallery, spent her evenings painting in her studio, and dated Jason, a charming musician who always seemed to need just a little more money to make his big break. She looked up at her father now, seeing the deep lines etched into his forehead, the gray that had crept into his once dark hair seemingly overnight. "What is it, Dad?" she asked, setting down her fork. Thomas took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling heavily. "The company is finished. We're bankrupt. I made some investments that went wrong, trusted the wrong people. We're going to lose everything. The house, the business, all of it." The words hit Natalie like a physical blow. She felt the air leave her lungs. "What? How is that possible?" "There's only one way out," Thomas continued, unable to meet her eyes. "A merger. But it comes with a condition." Before Natalie could ask what condition, the double doors to the dining room opened. A man stepped through, and Natalie's breath caught in her throat. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, with dark hair peppered with silver at the temples. His suit was immaculate, tailored perfectly to his broad shoulders and lean frame. But it was his eyes that captured her attention. They were a piercing blue, cold as ice, and when they landed on her, she felt exposed, as if he could see straight through her. "Miss Rivers," the man said, his voice deep and smooth. "I'm Damian Blackwood." Everyone knew that name. Damian Blackwood was a legend in the business world, a self-made billionaire who had built an empire from nothing. He was also known for his ruthlessness, his inability to compromise, and his complete lack of interest in anything that didn't serve his purposes. "Mr. Blackwood," Natalie managed, standing on shaky legs. Damian moved further into the room, his presence filling every corner. "Your father and I have been discussing a solution to his financial difficulties. I'm prepared to inject enough capital to save Rivers Industries and clear all debts." "That's generous," Natalie said carefully, sensing there was more. "In exchange," Damian continued, his eyes never leaving hers, "you will marry me." Natalie laughed. She couldn't help it. The sound came out sharp and disbelieving. "Excuse me?" "Marriage," Damian repeated, as if discussing a business contract. "It will be a formal arrangement. 2 years. After that time, we divorce, and you walk away with $10 million. Your father keeps his company." "This is insane," Natalie said, looking to her father for support. But Thomas wouldn't meet her eyes. "Dad, tell him this is crazy." "Natalie, please," Thomas whispered. "It's our only option." "I have a boyfriend," she protested weakly. "Then call him," Damian said, pulling out his phone and placing it on the table. "Tell him about the situation. See what he says." With trembling fingers, Natalie picked up her own phone and dialed Jason's number. He answered on the third ring, his voice groggy with sleep. "Nat? It's barely 9 in the morning." "Jason, something's happened," she said, her voice shaking. "My dad's company is bankrupt, and there's this man here. He wants me to marry him to save everything. I don't know what to do." There was a long pause on the other end. Then Jason laughed. "Wait, seriously? How much money are we talking?" Natalie's heart sank. "What? Think about it, babe. You marry this guy, get a massive payout, and then we're set for life. You could finally support my music career properly. This is perfect." "Jason, he's asking me to marry him." To be his wife. For 2 years. It's nothing. Just business. Look, I gotta go. I have a gig tonight. But seriously, don't be stupid about this. The line went dead. Natalie stood frozen, the phone still pressed to her ear, unable to process what had just happened. The man she thought loved her had just told her to marry someone else for money. I see, Damien said quietly. He had been watching her the entire time, reading every emotion that crossed her face. Your boyfriend is practical, if nothing else. Don't, Natalie snapped, anger flooding through her. You don't know anything about me or my life. I know enough, Damien replied. I know you're an artist who sells perhaps 3 paintings a year. I know your boyfriend has borrowed over $30,000 from you in the past year alone. I know your father has 2 months before creditors seize everything. And I know that right now, you're wondering if anyone actually values you for who you are. Natalie felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not in front of this cold, calculating man who spoke about marriage like it was a stock transaction. You have 24 hours to decide, Damien said, checking his expensive watch. After that, my offer expires. He turned to leave, his footsteps echoing across the marble floor. At the doorway, he paused and looked back at her. For what it's worth, Miss Rivers, I researched you thoroughly before making this proposal. You're stronger than you think. Certainly stronger than the people you've surrounded yourself with. Then he was gone, leaving Natalie alone with her father and a decision that would change her life forever. That night, Natalie stood in her art studio, staring at a half-finished painting. It was supposed to be a portrait of hope, of freedom, of all the things she wanted from life. Now it just looked naive. Her phone buzzed with messages from Jason, each one more manipulative than the last, encouraging her to take the deal, promising they'd be together afterward, reminding her of all his dreams that her money could fund. She thought about her father downstairs, probably drowning his sorrows in whiskey, facing the destruction of everything he'd built. She thought about the employees at Rivers Industries, people with families who would lose their jobs. And she thought about Damien Blackwood, with his ice-blue eyes and his strange comment about her being strong. At midnight, Natalie made her decision. She picked up her phone and sent a single text message to the number Damien had left. I accept your proposal. The reply came within seconds. Smart choice. I'll send a car at 9 tomorrow morning. Bring only what matters to you. Everything else will be provided. Natalie looked around her studio, at her paintings and brushes, at the life she was about to leave behind. She had no idea what she was walking into, but she knew with absolute certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. The wedding happened so quickly that Natalie barely had time to process it. 3 days after accepting Damien's proposal, she found herself standing in a courthouse wearing a simple cream dress, repeating vows that felt hollow in her mouth. There were no guests, no flowers, no celebration. Just a judge, 2 witnesses Damien had hired, and the scratching of pens on paper as they signed their names to a marriage certificate. Damien wore a dark gray suit and barely looked at her during the entire ceremony. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, there was no kiss, no embrace. Just a brief nod before Damien guided her out to a waiting car with his hand barely touching the small of her back. The drive to his estate took 40 minutes, winding through countryside until they reached a massive iron gate. Beyond it stood a mansion that looked like it belonged in a Gothic novel. Gray stone walls rose 3 stories high, covered in climbing ivy. Tall windows reflected the cloudy sky, and towers stood at each corner like silent sentinels. Welcome home, Damien said, though his tone suggested anything but warmth. Inside, the mansion was breathtaking but cold. Marble floors stretched endlessly, crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, and priceless artwork adorned the walls. But there was no comfort here, no sense of life. It felt like a museum, beautiful but untouchable. A stern-looking woman in her 50s approached them. "This is Mrs. Patterson, the head housekeeper," Damien introduced. "She'll show you to your quarters." "My quarters?" Natalie asked. "The East Wing," Damien replied. "I occupy the West Wing. We'll maintain separate living spaces. Meals will be served in the main dining room at 7 in the evening. I expect punctuality." Before Natalie could respond, he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing through the empty halls. Mrs. Patterson led Natalie up a grand staircase and down a long corridor lined with portraits of stern-faced people from another era. "Mr. Blackwood values his privacy," the housekeeper said. "The West Wing is off-limits. He doesn't permit visitors in his personal space." The East Wing was luxurious but impersonal. Her bedroom was twice the size of her old studio, with a 4-poster bed, a sitting area, and French doors that opened onto a balcony overlooking manicured gardens. Her clothes had already been unpacked and hung in a closet that could have housed an entire boutique. But none of it felt like hers. That first week, Natalie barely saw her husband. He left early each morning and returned late at night. Their only interaction came during those silent dinners, where they sat at opposite ends of a ridiculously long table, eating gourmet meals prepared by a chef she never met. Damien would read documents while eating, occasionally making notes, completely ignoring her presence. On the 8th day, Natalie's curiosity got the better of her. She had explored every inch of the East Wing and the main floor, but the West Wing called to her like a mystery begging to be solved. What was Damien hiding behind those closed doors? She waited until she heard his car leave that morning, then made her way to the forbidden corridor. Her heart pounded as she tried the first door. Locked. The second door opened into what appeared to be a home office, neat and organized, revealing nothing personal. The third door was locked again. But the fourth door opened, and what Natalie saw inside made her gasp. The room was a shrine. Photographs covered every wall, hundreds of them, all featuring the same woman. She was beautiful, with long golden hair and warm brown eyes that sparkled with life. In some photos she was laughing, in others she was painting, and in several she stood beside a much younger Damien, his arm around her waist, his face transformed by a smile Natalie had never seen. In the center of the room sat an easel holding an unfinished portrait of the woman. Art supplies surrounded it, untouched by dust, as if someone still came here regularly. Her name was Catherine. Natalie spun around to find Damien standing in the doorway. His face was expressionless, but his eyes burned with an emotion she couldn't name. "I thought you left," she stammered. "I forgot something. Clearly, I should have locked this door." He stepped into the room, his gaze moving over the photographs with a tenderness that made Natalie's chest ache. "Who was she?" Natalie asked softly. "My wife," Damien said. "My real wife. She died 5 years ago." The words hung in the air between them. Natalie felt her stomach twist. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have intruded." "No, you shouldn't have." Damien's voice was flat now, the moment of vulnerability gone. "But since you're here, you might as well know the truth. Catherine was an artist, like you. We were married for 10 years. She was everything good in my life." He moved to the easel, his fingers hovering over the unfinished portrait without touching it. "She was painting this self-portrait when she died. A car accident. The driver was drunk, ran a red light. She died instantly." "Damien, I'm so sorry," Natalie whispered. He turned to face her, and the ice in his eyes had returned. "This is why I needed a marriage of convenience, Natalie. This is why it has to be emotionless, transactional. I loved once, completely and absolutely. I won't make that mistake again." "Love isn't a mistake," Natalie said. "It is when it destroys you." Damien walked past her toward the door. "Stay out of this room. In fact, stay out of the entire West Wing." That was the agreement. But as he reached the doorway, Natalie noticed something in one of the photographs on the wall. Her blood ran cold. In the background of a picture showing Catherine at an art gallery opening, there was a man she recognized. Her father. Thomas Rivers, younger but unmistakable, standing in the crowd. "Damien, wait," she called. "Why is my father in this photograph?" Damien stopped but didn't turn around. The silence stretched for so long that Natalie thought he wouldn't answer. "Go back to your wing, Natalie," he finally said, his voice tight. "Some truths are better left buried." Then he was gone, leaving Natalie alone in the room full of ghosts and questions that multiplied with every passing second. She looked again at the photograph, studying every detail. Her father was talking to Catherine, his hand on her arm, both of them smiling. What connection did her father have to Damien's dead wife? And why had neither of them mentioned it when arranging this marriage? Natalie couldn't sleep that night. She lay in her enormous bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with questions. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that photograph, her father and Catherine, looking far too familiar with each other. By dawn, she had made a decision. She needed answers, and she was going to get them. She found Damien in his study at 6 in the morning, already dressed in a suit, working at his desk. He looked up when she entered, surprise flickering across his face. "We need to talk," Natalie said, closing the door behind her. "It's 6 in the morning." "I don't care." She moved to stand in front of his desk, her arms crossed. "You're going to tell me the truth. All of it. Why did you really want to marry me? What does my father have to do with Catherine?" Damien leaned back in his chair, studying her. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he stood and walked to the window, his back to her. "Your father and I were business partners once," he began. 20 years ago, before either of us had made our fortunes. We started a company together, equal partners. But Thomas got greedy. He cooked the books, embezzled funds, and when I discovered it, he disappeared with half our capital." Natalie felt her legs weaken. "No. My father wouldn't do that." "He did." Damien's voice was hard. "It took me 5 years to rebuild. But I never forgot, and I never forgave. I spent the next 15 years waiting for the right moment for revenge. And then you met Catherine," Natalie whispered, the pieces falling into place. Damien turned to face her, and the pain in his eyes made her heart clench. "Catherine was Thomas Rivers' niece. I didn't know at first. By the time I discovered the connection, I was already in love with her. She knew nothing about what her uncle had done, and I never told her. I couldn't bear to taint what we had with that ugliness." "But you married her anyway," Natalie said. "Even though she was related to the man who betrayed you." "I married her because she was the light in my darkness," Damien said quietly. "She made me believe that not everyone was corrupt, that love could exist without conditions or betrayals. She made me human again." He walked back to his desk and pulled out a folder, handing it to Natalie. Inside were newspaper clippings about the accident that killed Catherine. But there was also a police report, marked with highlighted sections. Natalie read slowly, her hands beginning to shake. The drunk driver who had hit Catherine had been driving a car registered to Rivers Industries. The investigation had uncovered evidence that the driver was on company business that night, delivering documents for Thomas Rivers. The case had been settled out of court with a massive payout that had been kept confidential. "My father," Natalie breathed. "The accident that killed your wife involved my father's company." "Not just involved," Damien said. "The driver was rushing to meet a deadline Thomas had imposed. He'd been working 18-hour days that week. Thomas pushed him beyond exhaustion, and when that wasn't enough, he looked the other way when the man showed up drunk. He cared more about a business deal than about safety." Natalie sank into a chair, the folder slipping from her fingers. "That's why you wanted to marry me. Revenge." You're using me to get back at my father. That was the plan, Damien admitted. When I learned Thomas was bankrupt, I saw my opportunity. I would take everything from him, including his daughter. I would make him watch as I trapped you in a loveless marriage, knowing he was powerless to stop it. Tears streamed down Natalie's face. I'm not a person to you. I'm just a weapon. That's what you were supposed to be, Damien said, and something in his voice made her look up. He was watching her with an expression she'd never seen before, vulnerable and almost afraid. But nothing has gone according to plan. What do you mean? Damien moved closer, kneeling in front of her chair so they were eye level. I mean that somewhere between the wedding and now, something changed. When I watch you paint in the garden, when you challenge me at dinner even though I try to ignore you, when you show kindness to Mrs. Patterson even though she's been cold to you, I see echoes of Catherine. Not because you're like her, but because you remind me what it feels like to care about someone. You don't know me, Natalie protested weakly. I know you stayed up all night helping Mrs. Patterson when her sister was sick, even though no one asked you to. I know you donate anonymously to art programs for underprivileged children. I know you cried the day your boyfriend proved he never loved you, but you didn't beg him to stay. You have dignity, Natalie. And strength. And a heart that refuses to harden despite every reason it should. Damien, she whispered, not knowing what to say. I'm not asking you to forgive me, he continued. What I did was unforgivable. I used you, manipulated you, trapped you in this marriage for all the wrong reasons. But I'm asking you to give me a chance to make it right. Not as revenge, not as business. As something real. Natalie looked into his blue eyes and saw the truth there. Somewhere along the way, the cold CEO had started to thaw. And somewhere along the way, she had started to care about him too, despite everything. My father, she said. What happens to him? That's your choice, Damien replied. I'll abide by whatever you decide. If you want me to destroy him financially, I can do that. If you want me to save his company with no strings attached, I'll do that too. And if you want to walk away from both of us with your $10 million and never look back, I'll understand. Natalie stood and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens where she'd spent so many afternoons painting, trying to find peace in this strange new life. She thought about her father, who had made terrible choices that led to a woman's death. She thought about Damien, who had been consumed by grief and rage for 5 years. And she thought about herself, trapped between two men's war, trying to figure out who she was beyond being a pawn. I want the truth, she finally said. I'm going to see my father, and I'm going to ask him about all of this. And after that, I'll decide what happens next. I'll have the car prepared, Damien said. No. Natalie turned to face him. I'll go alone. But when I come back, we're going to have a real conversation. No more secrets, no more manipulation. If there's any chance of this marriage becoming something real, it starts with honesty. For the first time since she'd known him, Damien smiled. It was small, hesitant, but genuine. I can agree to that. 3 hours later, Natalie sat across from her father in his office at Rivers Industries. The company was running again thanks to Damien's investment, but Thomas looked older than she'd ever seen him, worn down by guilt and secrets. Tell me about Catherine Blackwood, Natalie said without preamble. Her father's face went pale. How do you know about Catherine? Tell me, Dad. All of it. And he did. He told her about embezzling from Damien 20 years ago, about the guilt that had eaten at him ever since. He told her about Catherine, his niece who he'd loved like a daughter, and the accident that had haunted him for 5 years. He told her how he'd used company money to settle the lawsuit, how he'd buried the evidence, how his business had slowly crumbled under the weight of his guilt and bad decisions. When Damien came to me with the marriage proposal, Thomas finished, his voice breaking, I knew it was punishment. I knew I deserved it. But I was too much of a coward to refuse. I sacrificed you to save myself, just like I sacrificed Catherine's memory by covering up my role in her death. Natalie sat in silence, processing everything. Finally, she stood. You were right about one thing, Dad. You are a coward. But you're going to fix this. You're going to use the money Damien invested to make things right. Set up a foundation in Catherine's name for road safety. Fund art programs. Use your second chance to become the man you should have been all along. And us? Thomas asked. Can you ever forgive me? I don't know, Natalie answered honestly. Ask me again when you've earned it. When Natalie returned to the mansion, she found Damien waiting in the garden where she usually painted. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. How did it go? He asked. He told me everything. Natalie sat beside him on the bench. He's going to try to make amends. Whether that's enough, I don't know. They sat in silence for a while, watching the sunset. Finally, Damien spoke. I know what you're probably thinking. That you should take the money and run, that you'd be crazy to stay with someone who started this marriage as revenge. Actually, Natalie said, I was thinking about something you said. About second chances. About becoming real. She turned to face him, her heart pounding. I'm not going to lie and say I've fallen in love with you. I barely know you. But I want to. I want to know the man who loved Catherine so completely that losing her almost destroyed him. I want to know the man who's shown me kindness even when he was trying to stay cold. I want a chance to see if this marriage could become something neither of us expected. Damien stared at her, and she watched emotions play across his face, hope, fear, disbelief. You're sure? Even knowing everything? Especially knowing everything, Natalie said. Because now we can start fresh. No secrets, no lies. Just two broken people trying to figure out if they can heal each other. Slowly, carefully, Damien reached out and took her hand. His palm was warm against hers, and Natalie felt a spark of something that might, eventually, become love. Then let's start over, he said softly. Hi, I'm Damien Blackwood. I'm a workaholic with terrible communication skills and enough emotional baggage to fill this mansion. But I'm trying to be better. Natalie smiled, squeezing his hand. Hi, I'm Natalie. I'm an artist who's still figuring out who she is. I make impulsive decisions and trust too easily. But I'm learning. As the last rays of sunlight faded, they sat together in the garden, hands intertwined, taking the first real step toward a future neither of them had planned but both were willing to explore. It wouldn't be easy. There would be hard conversations ahead, old wounds to heal, trust to rebuild. But for the first time since this impossible marriage began, Natalie felt something she hadn't expected. Hope. And in Damien's eyes, as he looked at her in the fading light, she saw that same fragile hope reflected back. Two people trapped by circumstance, choosing to become something more. Choosing each other, not out of obligation or revenge, but out of possibility. The cold CEO had begun to thaw, and the trapped wife had discovered her own strength. Together, they would write a new story, one where the past's shadows couldn't dim the promise of tomorrow.